It started as a pretty ordinary Thursday evening. One of those days that slip by like they were never meant to leave a mark. Tara had gone out for one of her girls' nights, something that used to happen once a month but had been happening more often lately, 3 times this month alone. I didn't mind, though. I mean, she deserved her fun. I had my poker nights with the guys, so it felt fair. At least, that's what I told myself. The kids were in bed by 9. The house was quiet. I sat in the living room, scrolling through some mindless news on my phone, half watching a rerun of a show Tara and I used to binge together before her nights out started to become more frequent. The clock ticked louder than usual, and I couldn't help but glance at my watch every few minutes. 11 turned into midnight, and then it was almost 1 in the morning before I heard the door slam open. She stumbled in, literally stumbled. Her heels clattered onto the tile as she kicked them off, her coat half draped over one shoulder like she'd forgotten how to wear it properly. The smell of alcohol hit me before I even saw her face, sharp and bitter, like she'd bathed in it. Tara wasn't a big drinker, not normally. Seeing her like that, it was off. Really off. "Hey," I said, standing up from the couch. I wasn't angry, just concerned. "You okay?" She laughed, this weird high-pitched laugh that didn't sound like her. "Perfect," she slurred, dragging herself toward the kitchen counter. Her hand fumbled for the edge of the counter as she steadied herself. Girls' night was wild. You should have seen it, babe. I didn't respond right away, just watched her. Something wasn't right. Her lipstick was smudged, not just the faint kind of smudge from a drink or two, but smeared, like someone had kissed her hard and fast. Her hair, usually so carefully styled before a night out, was tangled in a way that didn't match her usual careful persona. "Did you drive like this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She waved me off. No. I got a ride. Kayla's boyfriend dropped me off." Then she turned to me, her eyes glassy but off somehow, like she was trying too hard to act normal. "Don't start worrying, Vance. I'm a big girl." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stood there, watching her as she pulled a glass out of the cupboard and filled it with water. That's when I noticed her shirt, rumpled and untucked in a way that didn't look accidental. That's when it hit me, this sharp, cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to ask her about it, about all of it, but the words got caught in my throat. Instead, I leaned against the counter, pretending to be calm. "You had fun, then?" I asked casually. She nodded, gulping down the water. "Yeah, it was a good night." But something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Her voice had this edge to it, this forced cheerfulness. I kept my face neutral, but my mind was already spiraling. The marks, the way she looked, the way she smelled like a cocktail of booze and something else. Something faintly sweet and unfamiliar. Something was wrong. I didn't realize how tightly I was gripping the edge of the counter until my fingers started to cramp. She was still standing there, leaning against the sink, sipping her water with this casualness that felt so unnatural. I wanted to say something, ask the question swirling in my head, but I froze, like a part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Not yet." She mumbled something about heading to bed and turned toward the stairs. I nodded, pretending to be engrossed in my phone, though the screen was black. I needed to think. Figure out what I was even looking for. And then it happened. Halfway up the stairs, Tara tripped. It wasn't unusual, she was clearly drunk, but as she stumbled forward, her phone slipped out of her hand and bounced off the step, landing a few feet away. She dropped to her knees, cursing softly as she reached for it. That's when I saw it. Her skirt. The zipper on the side was undone, hanging halfway down, and the fabric was slightly twisted, like it had been pulled on carelessly. But that wasn't the part that stopped me cold. There was a stain near the hem, faint but unmistakable. Something had splashed on it. My mind went to the worst possible place, and no matter how much I tried to shake it, the thought clung to me. I stood there frozen, watching her fumble with her phone. She muttered under her breath, smoothing her skirt with one hand, completely oblivious to my stare. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for her to pick up the phone and finish her climb upstairs. She didn't even notice me following her with my eyes. When I finally moved, it was toward the stairs. I wanted to follow her, to ask her point blank why her skirt looked like that, why she smelled the way she did, why she was acting so wrong. But as I reached the bottom step, I stopped. What was I going to say? What if I was wrong? What if I wasn't? Instead, I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Then I sat on the couch, staring into the dark, the tension in my chest growing like a knot I couldn't untangle. I tried to brush it off, convince myself it was nothing, but the stain on her skirt was burned into my brain. A couple of hours later, as the house stayed quiet and the clock ticked closer to 3 a.m., I realized I wasn't going to sleep. So I made a decision, a stupid, impulsive decision, but I had to know. I crept upstairs, careful not to wake her, and eased open the bedroom door. She was sprawled on the bed, face down, still fully dressed. Her phone was on the nightstand. I don't know what possessed me to pick it up. Maybe it was the unease eating at me since she came through the door. Maybe it was instinct. Whatever it was, I grabbed it, my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. I didn't have to look far. Her texts were open. The most recent conversation was with a contact saved as M, with a generic gray profile picture. I told myself it could be innocent. Maybe it was one of her friends, someone from work. But then I saw the messages. You looked amazing tonight. You didn't look so bad yourself. Wish we could have had more time. Next time, I'll make sure we do. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. There were more messages, flirty, suggestive, each one worse than the last. They weren't just messages. There were photos. Nothing explicit, but enough to paint a picture I didn't want to see. My mind went blank. Completely, utterly blank. I couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Tara, my wife, my partner of 11 years, the woman I built a life with, was texting someone like this. Acting like this. My Tara. I put the phone down, gently, like it might explode if I wasn't careful. My body felt heavy, like I was sinking into the floor, and my chest ached in a way I didn't know was possible. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to wake her up and demand an explanation, but all I could do was sit there in silence, replaying those messages over and over in my head. Who was M? How long had this been going on? Was tonight the first time, or had there been others? The questions came like a flood, each one worse than the last, and I had no answers. Only a knot in my gut and a phone full of evidence I wished I'd never seen. I stayed there for hours, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall while she slept, completely unaware. When the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, I knew two things for sure. 1, my life was never going to be the same. And 2, I couldn't pretend I didn't know. The next morning, I woke up in the armchair in the living room. I must have fallen asleep there after pacing half the night, trying to figure out how to confront her, how to piece together the words I'd need to get through it without breaking down completely. By the time I heard her coming down the stairs, my heart was already racing. She sounded like herself again. Light footsteps, a quiet yawn. Nothing about her demeanor hinted at what I'd uncovered hours earlier. For a second, I questioned whether I was making a mistake, whether this could all be explained away. But then I thought of the messages, the photos, the stain on her skirt. I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. She rounded the corner into the kitchen and smiled at me. "Morning," she said casually, brushing her hair back into a loose ponytail. She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts and leggings, her face clean and unguarded. The image of normalcy hit me like a punch to the gut. "Morning," I managed to say. My voice was tight. It must have caught her attention because she paused, tilting her head. "Are you okay? You look like you didn't sleep." She crossed the kitchen, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. "What's wrong?" It was such an ordinary question, but the weight of everything I'd been carrying exploded in my chest. My palms were sweaty, and my throat felt dry, but I forced the words out. Tara, I need to ask you something. She froze, mug in hand. What is it? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. What happened last night? She blinked, confused. What do you mean? I told you, I was out with the girls. Kayla's boyfriend dropped me off, remember? It was the way she said it, with that same rehearsed tone as the night before. Like she'd practiced it in her head. Yeah, you said that. But something about it doesn't add up. Her eyes narrowed. What doesn't add up? Vance, you're acting weird. I leaned against the counter, trying to keep my voice even. Your skirt, Tara. When you came home, your zipper was undone, and there was a stain on it. You smelled like perfume that wasn't yours. And then there's your phone. Her face paled. She set the mug down slowly, her movements deliberate, like she was buying time. My phone. What about my phone? I saw your messages, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I saw them, Tara. With M. Who is he? For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then she looked away, her jaw tightening. You went through my phone, she said, her voice rising, more defensive than anything else. I pushed off the counter, my frustration boiling over. I wouldn't have gone through your phone if you hadn't given me a reason to. So just tell me the truth. Who is he? She folded her arms across her chest, her eyes darting to the side like she was searching for an escape. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. It's never what we think, is it? Then what is it, Tara? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been sneaking around behind my back. She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I didn't plan for this to happen, Vance. It got out of hand. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. Her words confirmed everything I didn't want to believe. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vance. How long, Tara? She hesitated, tears streaming down her face now. It only happened once last night, she said finally, her voice cracking. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Why? I asked, my voice raw. Why would you do this? Was I not enough for you? Were we not enough? It's not about that, she said quickly, stepping closer to me. It's not about you, Vance. I swear. I felt like I was suffocating. Between the kids, work, everything. We never had time for us anymore. And then it happened between us by chance, as if a spark had passed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You mattered to me, I said, my voice rising. You've always mattered to me. Everything I do for you and the kids. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I know, Vance. I screwed up. I'm so sorry. But her apology didn't feel like enough. It felt hollow, like it couldn't even begin to touch the damage she'd done. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice shaking with anger. She dropped her hands, her face red and blotchy. It wasn't nothing, she said softly, almost too softly to hear. Her words felt like a slap. So what now? I asked, my voice cold. Do you love him? She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I ran a hand through my hair, turning away from her. My chest felt like it was about to cave in, and my mind was racing 100 miles a minute. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice barely steady. I need time to think. Vance, please, she said, reaching for me, but I pulled away. I need space, I said firmly. I need to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with this. She didn't argue, and for that, I was grateful. I grabbed my keys and left the house without looking back, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a crushing tide. The day after the confrontation was quiet. Too quiet. Tara and I barely exchanged words, and the silence hung in the air like a storm cloud. The kids ran around the house, oblivious to the tension, laughing and playing like it was any other day. I envied their innocence. They didn't know that their entire world was on the verge of collapsing. I sat at the dining table, staring out the window at the backyard where the kids were chasing each other with foam swords. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. My mind was a mess, a constant loop of everything Tara had said, everything I'd read in those texts, and the overwhelming question of what came next. Divorce. The word sat heavy in my chest. It wasn't something I'd ever thought I'd have to consider. I grew up in a home where my parents stuck it out no matter what. It wasn't always perfect, but they stayed together. For us. I thought Tara and I would do the same. But how do you come back from something like this? How do you rebuild trust when the foundation has been shattered? By midday, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to pretend this didn't happen. I wasn't going to sweep it under the rug and act like we could go back to the way things were. But I also couldn't just rip our family apart overnight. The kids didn't deserve that. They deserved stability, even if it was temporary. When Tara came into the room, I cleared my throat and gestured for her to sit down. She looked hesitant, like she already knew what I was going to say. Her face was puffy from crying, and she avoided my eyes as she took the seat across from me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "I know." I took a deep breath. "I've made a decision. For the sake of the kids, we're going to stay in the house, for now. But things are going to change." She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean we'll stay here together, but only as parents. Nothing more." I leaned back in my chair, trying to keep my emotions in check. "We'll sleep in separate rooms. We'll figure out a way to divide responsibilities for the kids. But this marriage, it's over, Tara. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "Vance, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "You've already done enough. You made your choice when you decided to lie to me. To betray me. There's no coming back from that." Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. She wasn't the woman I thought she was, and I didn't know if I'd ever be able to look at her without feeling this anger, this heartbreak. "But the kids," she said, her voice trembling. "How are we supposed to explain this to them?" "We'll tell them when the time is right," I said, my tone softening slightly. "For now, we'll keep things as normal as possible. They don't need to know all the details. Just that we're doing what's best for them." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. "I don't want to hurt them either." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of us. I glanced around the dining room, taking in the familiar surroundings, the framed photos on the wall, the scuffed wooden floors, the crayon marks on the table from a particularly creative afternoon with the kids. This was our home, our life, and now it was falling apart. That night, I moved my things into the guest room. It felt surreal, like I was an outsider in my own house. I couldn't bring myself to take down the family photos or pack away the little trinkets that Tara and I had collected over the years. Not yet. It was too soon. The first few days were awkward. We tiptoed around each other, communicating only when necessary. I made breakfast for the kids while Tara packed their lunches. She took them to school in the mornings, and I picked them up in the afternoons. We acted like a team in front of them, but behind closed doors, the tension was palpable. Tara tried to talk to me a few times, but I shut her down each time. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her apologies. I needed space to process everything, to figure out how to move forward. The trust was gone, and I didn't see how it could ever be rebuilt. One evening, as I was tucking the kids into bed, my daughter, Lily, looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Daddy, why don't you sleep in your room with Mommy anymore?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. Sometimes grown-ups need their own space, I said gently. But don't worry, okay? Mommy and I both love you and your brother very much. That will never change. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, but I could tell she knew something was wrong. Kids are more perceptive than we give them credit for. After they were asleep, I sat in the guest room, staring at the stack of divorce papers I'd picked up from the lawyer's office earlier that day. It felt final, like the end of a chapter one wasn't ready to close. But it was necessary. I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. The next morning, I handed Tara the papers. She didn't say anything, just took them with trembling hands and a tearful nod. It was the beginning of the end. The house was quiet as I walked out the door, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hallway. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to protect my kids. No matter what. The first few weeks after handing Tara the divorce papers felt like walking through a fog. Every step was heavy, every breath came with the weight of the past pressing down on me. I'd wake up in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, and for a moment, I'd forget everything. But then it would come rushing back. The texts, the confrontation, the way her voice cracked when she admitted what she'd done. The knot in my chest would tighten all over again. The house didn't feel the same anymore. It was quieter, even though the kids were still there, running around and filling the air with their laughter. I tried to hold on to that, to focus on them, because they were the only thing keeping me grounded. I'd watch Lily and Caleb play in the backyard, their voices rising and falling with excitement, and remind myself that they deserved stability, even if it felt like my world was crumbling. Tara and I kept our interactions civil. Barely. She'd moved into our bedroom full-time while I stayed in the guest room, and we only spoke when it was about the kids. It was awkward, like living with a stranger who happened to know all your secrets. Sometimes, I'd catch her watching me, like she wanted to say something, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe I'd never be ready. One night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself sitting on the porch, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring up at the stars. It was quiet out there, the kind of quiet that forces you to sit with your thoughts, no matter how much you try to push them away. I thought about the years Tara and I had spent together. The good times, the laughter, the plans we made for the future. It felt like a lifetime ago, like I was remembering someone else's life. How did we get here? That question haunted me. I thought we were solid, unshakable. Sure, we had our rough patches. What couple doesn't? But I never imagined it would end like this. I thought about her words during the confrontation, how she said she felt like she didn't matter. That part stuck with me, even through my anger and heartbreak. I wondered if I'd missed the signs, if I'd been too wrapped up in work or the kids to see that she was drifting away. But then I'd remind myself, no matter how lost she felt, she had a choice. She could have come to me, told me how she was feeling. Instead, she chose to betray me, to let someone else into the life we built together. That was on her, not me. As the weeks turned into months, I started to focus on rebuilding. I threw myself into being a dad, into making sure Lily and Caleb felt safe and loved. I started cooking more, trying out new recipes with them, turning dinner time into something we looked forward to instead of something we rushed through. I helped Lily with her art projects and spent hours building Lego cities with Caleb. They became my anchor, the reason I got out of bed each morning. The divorce process was slow, messy, and painful, but I stayed firm. Tara cried during one of our mediation meetings, saying she didn't want things to end this way, that she still loved me. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Whatever love I'd felt for her had been buried under the weight of her choices, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever find it again. Eventually, we reached an agreement. I'd keep primary custody of the kids, and Tara would have visitation every other weekend. She agreed to move out of the house after the divorce was finalized. The day she packed her things was surreal. I watched her load box after box into her car, the life we'd built together reduced to cardboard and packing tape. She stood in the driveway for a moment, looking back at the house, and for a second, I thought she was going to say something. But she just nodded, got into her car, and drove away. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in the living room and looked around. The house felt empty, but it also felt like mine again. For the first time in months, I felt a small flicker of peace. Moving forward wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when I'd sit in the quiet and let the tears come. But slowly, I started to find myself again. I reached out to friends I hadn't seen in years, started going to the gym, and even took up running. It wasn't about looking for distractions, it was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I also started therapy, something I'd always dismissed in the past. Sitting in that small, cozy office, talking to someone who wasn't there to judge or fix me, felt like a lifeline. My therapist helped me unpack the anger, the guilt, the grief. She reminded me that healing wasn't linear, that it was okay to feel strong one day and broken the next. Through it all, the kids were my constant. We fell into a new routine, one that felt stable and safe. I made it a point to be present for them, to show them that no matter what happened between me and Tara, they were loved. They were my everything. One evening, months after the divorce was finalized, I was tucking Lily into bed when she looked up at me and said, "You're smiling more now, Daddy." I paused, caught off guard. "I am." She nodded, her little face serious. "Yeah, I like it." Her words stayed with me long after she fell asleep. She was right. I was smiling more. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was learning to find joy again, even in the small moments. The betrayal had changed me, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen, making pancakes while the kids argued over which syrup to use. The sun streamed through the windows, filling the room with warmth. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The pain was still there, like a scar I'd carry with me forever. But scars mean you've healed, that you've survived. And as I looked at my kids, laughing and arguing and just being kids, I knew one thing for sure. This betrayal, this chapter of my life, didn't define me. I was more than the pain. I was a father, a friend, and a man who was ready to move forward.